request Mr. Vishak Raman, Director, Security Business India and SAARC, Cisco, to talk to us about platform approach to reduce time to detect and time to remediate cyber threats. And just a very quick reminder for all of our audiences here, for all of our delegates who are joining us for the virtual event, we also have the DSCI Innovation Box scheduled at 6:50 p.m. To witness the showcase of 7 promising Indian cybersecurity startups in a live session. So do join us for the DSCI Innovation Box. And now over to you, Mr. Raman.
Hi, you probably know us as the largest networking company in the world. But there are a few things you might not know. Networking isn't our only game. We're also about security. In fact, we help protect 100% of Fortune 100 companies, so we're very familiar with the state of security. And we know that things can and should be so much easier for you. Look, you're working hard to help your company get headlines for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. But dynamic threats, changing compliance requirements, a distributed workforce, and more have led to a patchwork of protection that you and your team are holding together, and you're probably starting to wear a little thin. We think it's time the security industry did better. So we're building a platform that will protect your networks, applications, endpoints, and cloud. We're letting your products and services work as a team. Our platform is simple to manage, giving you time back to stay one step ahead of emerging risks. And an open API model and alliances let you leverage the infrastructure you're already using, regardless of the vendor. We know security is central to everything your organization is trying to achieve. So we've invested more than any other company, like a lot more, to deliver a platform that simplifies your experience, accelerates your success, and protects your future. So perhaps we should reintroduce ourselves. We're Cisco. We're the world's largest networking and security company, and we'd like to show you how security can be easier and more effective so that you can protect what's now and what's next.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity from DSCI to share our perspective around a platform-based approach and how does it actually effectively helps to reduce time to detect and remediate. And as practitioners, these are 2 important criteria. So let's take a step back and look at where this industry is heading towards. If you look at it, as security practitioners, we've seen in the last 2.5 decades, how the security industry has morphed. You know, it started with a basic firewalling with an access control list, then came the antivirus era, then came the focused threat era, then came the whole SIEM era of integration, and we got moved into the feeling of about trust. But I think, you know, where we are heading towards after spending about 2.5 decades in this security industry, we are getting into a parameter-based approach. And the parameters, what matters to our practitioners is across 3. The time to hack, which is actually decreasing, which as a practitioner, it's completely external to you. But those 2 other parameters, which is time to detect and time to remediate, is completely in our hands in terms of controlling our destiny against the battle against these bad guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit more deeper into these 2 parameters, time to detect and time to remediate, and how a platform-based approach helps you to reduce both of it. But having said that, let's take a step forward and look at what are the threats, what we are seeing, and especially on the parameter of time to hack. Today, time to hack has become more geopolitical than ever before. And we've seen time and again, it's getting a lot more political in nature. And if you look at the recent trends, some of the recent reports published by House of Commons Committee in the UK, as recent as October 10th, the report clearly marks across a particular vendor being barred from the 5G trials. And it also talks about the ownership model of that OEM per se. And more importantly, it also briefs about the nexus between the strong cyber force, what the government is preparing, and the funding and the interlink between the government of that particular country. So it'll be an interesting thought for all of the listeners to go across and see this and read through these reports. And it also talks about the linkages between the APT-10 group and the company per se. So it's becoming a lot more realistic in terms of geopolitical in nature. For the first time, we saw Facebook and Twitter doing takedowns across 9 countries in a very specifically around cybersecurity. And for the first time, we saw a huge amount of ransomware asked by Clopleaks, close to about 20 million, which is a whooping amount. And again, for an attack which happened across a software giant in Germany. So this is pretty new, where traditionally we've seen ransomware is 40 bitcoins, 50 bitcoins, but for the first time, what we saw anywhere between 1% to 9% of annual revenues. This is pretty recent right now. And we also saw on our side of the story where a group called Transparent Tribe, which tries to actually took the defense and armed forces targeting an email vector per se. So it's becoming a lot more geopolitical than ever before. And that's a trend what we are seeing. And if you look at the other trend, what we are seeing from a geopolitical part of it, it's becoming a lot more state-sponsored. And we are seeing the rise of cybercrime as a service, where a group called Revil, ransomware group, which actually put across about $1 million of cyber carat of bitcoins for a hire. So they are showing a HR professional a hire for a very wrong reason. And if you had a chance to look at the recent COVID-19 report done as a study by 5 major universities in the UK, they've clearly looked at the correlation between an event which is happening in the health sector and a cybercrime which is following it up. And it's a fantastic report which correlates cybercrime and actually what's happening during the pandemic. It'd be an interesting read for all of you as well. So in short, time to hack is completely external. It's becoming geopolitical, and there is a very little what practitioners can do about that, other than sort of getting appreciation around that. When we looked at the Indian cyber attacks for the last 6 months, what we did was we went ahead and then looked at certain incidents which is reported, and we mapped the threat vectors, what we are seeing from those reported vulnerabilities. So we did a comparison and painstakingly compared with 2019. This is what is really happening on the Indian cyberspace during this pandemic. And we saw some very interesting trend. And I thought it will be interesting to sort of share it back to the audience across these vulnerabilities. What we saw as a summary was still email vector was ruling the roost. And majority of incidents was around phishing and smishing. And very surprisingly, people are building layers of security on top of email security, like anti-phishing, domain protection, DMARC protection, and as well as the brand protection on the email vector per se. That is something which we are hearing from practitioners. And we also saw a good amount of identity thefts where there has been a root access entry point is in the cloud, whereby people take out the credentials during in the cloud era, and then they move laterally back into the data center. And that's where solutions, which is helping customers to geofence, multi-factor authentication to prevent against the so-called cloud jacking per se. So identity thefts on the rise. And the third part, what we saw from customers was cloud visibility. Because of the shift from on-premise to hybrid workload, more and more customers are saying, what's happening onto my workloads? Cloud visibility was the single most defined ask by the CISOs whom we have been sort of interacting. And we all know the endpoint control race is very imminent between the antivirus vendors, the EDR vendors, and of course the hackers, where an RDP protocol vulnerability, known vulnerability server is sold as high as about $22. So these 4 important trends is something which I thought I leave it with the audience. Of course, more and more requirement, what we saw from our services point of view is security posture analysis and also incident response as a service, which was on the rise. But sadly, still more and more customers, what we see from an incident response are more focusing towards the malware piece of it, remediating the malware, reformatting the machine, and then starting the business. But the root problem is, how do you detect your attacker path during the reconnaissance stage? Of course, we saw a huge amount of race during the pandemic on getting your cyber drills and employee training from a remote working scenarios. This is what we see in the attacks summary from a reference point of view. But we just want to also give across an information on what we did as a survey during the pandemic across 13 countries, across 2,800 security professionals. The findings were very, very interesting. And the first finding, what we saw was on time to detect. And if you really look at the dependencies on time to detect, everybody is focused towards reducing the attacker's dwell time. From a reconnaissance stage to actually a data exfiltration stage, how do you actually reduce the attacker's dwell time? Because it's going to reduce the lateral movement. It's going to reduce the attack impact per se. So more and more emphasis is being seeked out on time to detect. And when we looked at, I'm speaking to the practitioners, how are they actually feeling about time to detect as a parameter? Very interesting insights which came out. And they actually shared across the time to detect hurdles, which are the ones. The first one is, how do I orchestrate between multiple security vendor OEMs? And I call this classic one as console hopping. And when you add up the very challenging and the somewhat challenging, more than 80% of them have actually told that this console hopping is a big, big difficulty for them in terms of detecting whether the hacker is actually penetrated or not. And if you really look at it, there is a big drive towards automation, and close to about 77% of them have actually told us that security automation is in the top of the priority. The other important element was the alert fatigue. The number of alerts what a security operations team actually goes through is as high as about 50,000 alerts a day. And 70% of them felt that that's the biggest bottleneck for time to detect. And of course, over a legacy period of time, there is a huge amount of vendor consolidation which actually happened. And more customers are simplifying their security vendor consolidation so that they can cross over these time to detect hurdles. And when we double clicked, what is their perspective on a summary from a time to detect, the fundamental problem was visibility, and how do you bring in analytics on top of it? And most importantly is the threat intelligence feeds, which comes and lands on to how do you mash up what you see as your indicator of compromise at your setup, and how do you mash it up with the global threat intelligence. So time to detect, the summary part was visibility, threat intelligence, and analytics, and how do you orchestrate and automate across all of these three critical pillars. And quickly shifting gears to time to remediate. If you really look at the dependencies, what customers actually shared across was more about how do I keep my unpatched system. It's more about Tuesday patching, and majority of the customers have said 46% of them have said this was the threat came actually from an unpatched vulnerability. And I'm pretty sure my colleagues and the industry experts are going to talk more about how do you actually close this vulnerability window in terms of unpatched system? But that's what we are hearing from the customers. Malware, malicious spam, and phishing on the rise. And in terms of downtime, time to remediate, the time to actually come back to normalcy state, more than 17 hours was at the high end of it. But anywhere between 5 to 16 hours was the time to come back to the normal state for an attack per se. And when we also looked at, as a summary, the biggest challenge has been how do you deal with hybrid cloud? How do you get visibility on your applications? How do you get visibility on your on-premise network and as well as the endpoint? So this is becoming an important element to really look at time to remediate. And this is what we are hearing from customers. And when we looked at what are the key focus areas for CISOs during COVID-19, it's just not the technology piece. There's a huge list what a customer shared with us in terms of discussion points. It's about incident response. It's about employee training. It's about augmenting your SOC capability from a monitoring point of view. And how do you re-engage with your security vendors during the COVID? There will be a lot of focus towards technology piece on remote working and access policies. But I think it's just not the technology piece, but you got to look at it in a holistic way when you are looking at your cybersecurity posture during COVID-19. When we look just as a practitioner, there is a lot of areas within these six buckets what people are looking at. For example, how do you build zero trust framework during access capabilities? How do you rework your IR responsibilities during, and how do you rework your playbook per se? And also, how do you protect your employee privacy information? And how do you report back to your health authorities as well? And there's a huge focus towards security operations and vendor management, but we can share across and double click the practitioner point of view. Having said that, if you look at it, what we've been doing at Cisco to look at reducing the time to detect and time to remediate, Cisco has been on an acquisition route in terms of building the portfolio, but it was very clearly across three pillars, which is infrastructure, cloud, and endpoint application. We started with IronPort for email security, and as recent as a couple of weeks before, we acquired a company called PortShift, which is very specifically focused towards cloud native application security on Kubernetes. So if you really look at the platform, what Cisco has been sort of doing this with this string of pearls of acquisition is very simply putting it all together in a platform per se, which is what is our Securex platform per se. And all of these acquisitions have been normalized from a data integration point of view in terms of sharing the alerts, in terms of making sure that they all work together seamlessly in a common framework. And that's what we've sort of announced in the last 2 quarters back, especially during the COVID time. And this is Cisco Securex for customers who've been sort of buying this piecemeal approach. Today, we've put in a security wrap of unified security dashboard across, and it has got an inbuilt SAARC capability. A SAARC tool is defined inbuilt, and it has a capability to do threat hunting. It has a capability to look at security analytics, and it's a common framework. And it's completely API-based, it's completely cloud-based, and the way we've built it across is to help customers to do incident response, whereby we have pre-built APIs, not only integrating with security products from Cisco, but we also stepped it up the game with third-party as well, whereby it has an integrated framework on playbooks, automation. It has an API integration with third-party vendors. It has an event correlation and event analysis, and it has the Cisco Talos feeds coming in back to the threat console per se. And we didn't stop by just building a SAARC capability inbuilt into Securex. We also built capabilities of meaningful integration with third-party as such, whereby we integrate with our partners, be it Tenable, be it Splunk, be it Radware. All of it is kind of integrated with a common framework approach, which is API first. So what we've seen customers actually looking as a feedback from the last 6,000 customers who have adopted Securex was, how do I meaningfully actually reduce my time to detection and time to remediate? And this is something which we actually resonate very well with our Zero Trust framework. And Cisco has been labeled as a leader in the Zero Trust. Recent report, as recent as Q3 2020. And the way we look at the whole platform-based approach was well applauded by our customers. And Zero Trust is a journey. And what we've seen is customers adopting it over a platform-based approach rather than a piecemeal product-based approach. That's something which we thought we will share it across to all of you. And as Cisco, we defend 100% of the Fortune 100 companies every day. And we are more than happy to take up any questions, suggestions over chat, and we'll be more than happy to explain the Cisco Securex platform approach back to you. With this, I'll end my presentation. I'm more than happy to take any questions.